Welcome back. My name is Erica, and today's video is an updated version of my DIY reusable bread bags. I shared this a few years ago and it has become one of my most popular blog posts as well as videos on YouTube. So I wanted to share an updated version. These are really simple to make. They make great gifts for the bakers in your life, or they are great for you to have on hand. So stick around and let me show you how to make these. So we are going to jump right into this tutorial, but first I want to say really quickly that I do have a blog post that goes along with this video if you want the printable instructions. I will also leave a link up in the cards and down below in the description of the original video that I posted. That version is just slightly different, and I do have the directions for that in my blog post as well. This is just a little bit different. Not too crazy or anything like that. But if you want to check those out, I will make sure I have them linked. But for this tutorial, we are going to first start by cutting a half yard of either a linen or a cotton fabric. We are going to cut that 30 inches long. Next, we'll take that piece of fabric that we just cut and we're going to fold it in half. I call this hamburger style. I don't know if anyone else learned that in school, the hamburger style versus hot dog style. But we're going to fold it in half and line up the cut edges basically, or the open end. The opposite end where it's folded will be the bottom of our bag. But what I like to do is just add a few pins. This helps to keep the fabric together while we're doing our next set of cuts. You definitely don't have to do that part, but I find it helpful. So I'm just going to pop a couple of pins in there, and then we're going to get it cut to the correct width that we want. So now we are going to cut the width of our bag, and what I like to do first is cut off the selvage edge and give it a nice clean edge. I start on the left side of the bag. I like to use my rotary cutter and my cutting mat, but you definitely could just use scissors, use whatever you've got. The rotary cutter does make it easier, so if you are new to sewing, it's definitely not something you have to have, but it's a nice to have, you know, if you're doing a lot of projects. It just makes it a little bit easier. So I'm going to do that on the left side, and then we are going to cut the width to 13 inches. So I'm just moving my ruler over to the right side of the bag, lining the ruler up on the bottom of the cutting mat and on the top of the cutting mat, and cutting that to 13 inches wide. Once our cuts are made for the bag, I take a fabric measuring tape and measure 2 inches down from the top of the open end of the bag. And this is going to be a reference point for the channel we'll be making for our tie. Now in my previous tutorial that I did this on both sides because I used 2 ties. For this style, I'm only using 1 tie. So if you want more of, they're both cinch tops, but if you want 2 ties, then go ahead and reference that video that I have linked. But now I'm taking just a coordinating cotton thread that I have, and I'm going to start with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I will go on both sides of the bag. And for extra reinforcement, I'm actually going to be doing this twice. So the first was a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then I did a 3/8 inch seam allowance. You definitely don't have to do that, but if you want a little bit of extra reinforcements on the side, go ahead and do that. Make sure that you forward and backward stitch at the beginning and end, and that's just going to lock in everything in place so that if it gets tugged on, you know, if you're trying to fit a loaf of bread into the bag, it's not going to come apart, and it won't come apart when you inevitably have to wash it. So that's what that looks like, and like I said, I'm doing that on both sides. You just want to make sure that they're closed, obviously. So going ahead and doing that on the other side, and then we'll move on to the next step. Next, Next, I'm just going to trim the extra fabric off of the seams. I'm using pinking shears. Again, this is something that is optional. I have them because I had them for a project that I did, and so I like to use them, but you can definitely just use regular old scissors. That will do the job. It's just getting or making sure there's less bulk in those seams, and so that they will push out really nicely when you turn your bag right side out. I did forget to mention that you have to be doing this inside out. Most linens that I've come across have the same pattern on both sides, so it's not really an issue. But that is in the printable pattern. So sorry I forgot to mention that. But now we are going to flip our bag right side out and push out the corners. I just take a crochet hook and push them out so they are nice and pointy. Just do it with any blunt object that you've got, chopsticks or even the end of your scissors if they're not super sharp. But we're going to get that bag nice and right side out. And then the next step is going to be to make our channel for our tie. And that part is probably the most complicated part, but it's really not that hard. I would say this is maybe a beginning to middle level type project, sewing project. But it's definitely doable if you've got a few projects under your belt. That being said, we're just going to give it a nice iron, a nice press, and then we'll move on to sewing that channel. Now we are going to create the channel, and this little doohickey thing, it's called a sliding gauge. It's only a couple bucks. I think I got it at Joann's. It is a game changer in terms of hemming things. So again, that is something you don't have to have, but if you like to sew, it's something I would definitely recommend getting. But I'm going to start by folding over the top edge of the open end, and we're going to fold it over about a 1/2 inch. And this part is a little tricky, like I said, just because you're going around. It is a little bit easier when you've got the 2 tie set up. So again, just choose whichever you prefer. But we're going to fold it over about a 1/2 inch down, iron it, and then we'll fold it over again down to that 2 inch mark, and that'll create the channel for our tie. Then we're going to turn the bag back inside out and take it over to the sewing machine, and we're basically going to top stitch this, which means that we are going to sew as close to that bottom part of the hem or the open part. I don't know if you can kind of see it where my left index finger is. We're going to sew as close as we can to that and sew all the way around, making sure to forward and backward stitch at the beginning and end. And again, like I said, this is going to be the channel for our tie. Now moving on to making the tie, we are going to take the remaining fabric that we have from our 1/2 yard. Now depending, there's another strip that should be left over, and you might be able to get away with the length of that. It needs to be 31 inches long by 2 inches wide. So if you have a piece of fabric that is continuous or that is that long, go ahead and use that. Otherwise, you might have to cut 2 pieces of fabric, and that is okay. That is what I'm going to do here. So I don't know how long this fabric was, but it was plenty long. It just wasn't quite 31 inches long. I think it's probably 20 something. Anyway, I'm going to cut 2 pieces of fabric that is 2 inches wide, and however long this is, and we're going to sew them together and then cut them to the 31 inches long by 2 inches wide. Hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully you see what I'm doing here. We're going to cut the 2 strips and then we'll sew them together. That is just the easiest way to do it, unless of course you have some fabric that is left over that is 31 inches long. So we're just going to put 2 ends together, run it through the sewing machine. Doesn't matter what the hem length is, at least for these pieces, because they were plenty long. Forward and backward stitch at the beginning and end to reinforce them, and then we'll move on to cutting them. So to cut them, I just laid the big long strip out on my desk here, and I'm going to go from the center point all the way to the right, 15.5 inches, and cut it there. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side, 15.5 inches, and cut it there. And then you will have the length of 31 inches, and the piece of fabric is already 2 inches wide. Next, we are going to fold both ends over 1/4 of an inch and give it a press. And then what I like to do to reduce a little bit of bulk is just cut out a little rectangle shape in that fold, because once you get everything folded, it can be really bulky on both ends, and it's really hard, especially at the beginning for your sewing machine, to get through that. So I recommend reducing that just a little bit. Then we're going to use our little sliding gauge and fold the first long edge over 3/4 of an inch and give it a press. We'll do this for the entire length of our tie. Then we'll flip over the tie and we're going to fold the other long edge to basically meet in the middle. It should be about 1/4 of an inch. And you don't really need to use your gauge for this. You can if you want to, but just go down the entire length of the tie. Try not to overlap the 2 pieces of fabric. They might a little bit, but that's what I try to do. I just try to meet the edges together. Give it a good press, and then we're going to do one more fold, which is to fold the entire thing in half. We want this to be small enough so that it's going to easily fit through the channel that we made. And so what I do is I put a little pin at the end and then go through and fold it over in half, press it, and then pin it all the way down the entire length. Moving on to the final sewing step, we are going to sew this tie, and what I like to do is face the open part of the tie to the left, and we are going to forward and backward stitch at the beginning and end, and we are just going to keep that stitch as close to the edge as we possibly can. We do want to make sure that we take our time, because you want to make sure that you're stitching through all of those pieces of fabric. We did several folds at this point, so you want to make sure that you're stitching through all of them so that the tie is closed at the end. So take your time, go slow. It can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes the needle can go off the edge, and if that happens, you definitely can go back and fix it really easily. Most of the tie is not going to be seen, but you do obviously want to make it look as nice as you can. But there is our finished tie. We're just going to snip off all of the thread. And now it's time to feed our tie through our channel. So what I like to do is take a safety pin. Ideally, you'll want one that's larger than this, but I have not gotten any bigger ones. So this one works just as fine. And it might be a tad hard to get your tie into the channel at first. So just wiggle it a little bit and you'll get it in there eventually. And I just push the tie with my right hand, or really the safety pin with my right hand. And then I kind of pull the fabric over And we're just going to do this all the way around through the channel. Lastly, I like to just tie the ends of the tie into a knot so that you can ensure that the tie isn't going to be sucked through that channel and get stuck or come out, and you'll have to, put them back in, especially if you're giving them for gifts, but I think it just looks nice too. So just put a really tight knot at either end of the tie and your bread bag is complete. As I said at the beginning of the video, I will have a link to the printable instructions if you want to go ahead and print those out. I'll also have a link to the original video if you want to check that out as well. But thank you so much for being here. I hope that you learned something new. Let me know if you have any questions down below. But I thank you for being here, and if you want to see more tutorials like this, make sure that you subscribe to my channel. Hit that bell notification because it will alert you every time I upload a new video. But again, thanks so much for being here, and I will see you next time.